Edison and his assistants gathered around for the famous death watch of October 19, 1879. They watched the lamp for 10 hours.
Give it more juice.
20 hours.
More juice.
30. For 2 days and 2 nights, the lamp burned.
Now I knew we had it.
He invited the world, a world still lit by candles and gaslight, to come to Menlo Park to see. They came. On New Year's Eve, 1879, they came by the trainload and they saw. New light to the new world on this New Year's Eve, cried the press. The newspapers called it the miracle of the 19th century. Lighting up Menlo Park was only a stunt for New Year's Eve. The real test came when Edison announced that he would illuminate 1 square mile of the heart of New York City with a newfangled electric light. The bulb, the miracle bulb that gave the miraculous light, was only the beginning, the end component of 1,000 component parts. You need rheostats and generators and meters and fuses and sockets and switches and conductors to make it work. The incandescent light was not one, but 360 different inventions all welded together. To lay his lines and cables, he had to dig down into the bowels of the city. Edison himself supervised every move day and night. In later years, he was to say,
"This was the greatest adventure of my life."
To make light, you need power. He took a building on Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan and turned it into the first power plant for electric light in the United States. It started with coal furnaces in the basement. The coal made steam. The steam made power. The power turned the generators. From the generators came electricity. And the electricity became light. Light to the world. But hardly 2 years after the great triumph, tragedy struck the house of Edison. He tried to lose himself in work, but to the great giver of light, Menlo Park was full of shadows now. He had to move away from the place where he had lived for 8 happy years. 2 years after Mary Edison died, he found a haven in West Orange, New Jersey, in the lordly house called Glenmount. In the year 1886, he was 39 years old when he married Nina Miller, herself the daughter of an inventor.
My later courtship was carried on by telegraph. I taught the lady of my heart Morse code, and we got along much better than we could have with spoken words by tapping our remarks to one another on our hands. Presently, I asked her thus if she would marry me. The word yes is an easy one to send by telegraphic signals, and she sent it.
And here he took his new bride to live. Beyond the fields of Glenmount, just down the road, he built his new laboratory. Brick this time, the finest invention factory in the world, the big brother of Menlo Park. The nerve center of the compound was the old man's roll-top desk in an office that was 2 stories high, crammed with 10,000 scientific volumes. It was his combination office, laboratory, studio, library, and bedroom. On a small cot, he took his famous cat naps.
I never found need of more than 4 or 5 hours sleep in the 24. People talk of loss of sleep as a calamity. They better call it loss of time, vitality, opportunity.
No matter how hard he worked, he could always find time for his children. When they were away, he wrote them playful letters to be read in a mirror. On one of their toys, the wheel of light now caught his fancy.
It occurred to me that it was possible to devise an instrument that should do for the eye what the phonograph did for the ear.
His first idea was to put a continuous line of tiny photographs on a cylindrical shell, just like a photograph record, then to rotate the shell and let the eyes look at the photographs through a magnifying glass. It didn't work well enough to suit Edison. Then he thought, if he could put a long line of photographs on some sort of strip or tape, on something you could roll up. One day he saw an advertisement for a new kind of camera designed by a man named George Eastman. It took pictures on celluloid.
Without George Eastman, I don't know what the result would have been in the history of the motion picture. He tried to develop a narrow strip of sensitized film that would operate on a roll.
Observe, says the legend, that each picture has a slight change of position as it passes the point of vision. The rapid photograph of these different stages of movement upon a long strip of light-sensitive film creates the illusionary spectacle of movable figures. In order to see the figures move, you look through the magnifying glass of a peephole machine.
Our studio was almost as amazing as the pictures we made in it. It was such an ungainly-looking structure when it was done, and the boys had so much sport with it that we called it the Black Maria. In order to make certain of as long a working day as possible, we swung the whole building on pivots, like an old-fashioned river bridge, so it could be turned to follow the course of the sun. It was a ghastly proposition for a stranger daring enough to brave its mysteries. But we managed to make pictures there, and after all, that was the real test.
They made pictures there. Fred Ott Sneeze, the first copyrighted film. May Irwin and John Rice, the first movie kiss. The story of an American fireman, the first story film.
Did you know that one of my first thoughts for the motion picture was to combine it with the phonograph? My plan was to synchronize the camera and phonograph so as to record sounds when the pictures were made and reproduce the two in harmony. Talking pictures.
projector in his office, he showed the first home movies. The camera followed on one of his camping trips with his good friends Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, and the naturalist John Burroughs. But in the ripe years of his life, he found it good sometimes to rest from the hard job of being a wizard. At his winter home in Fort Myers, Florida, his family and friends would gather round.
What do I think of Einstein's theory? I don't think anything of it, because I don't understand it.
And he liked to drive around the grounds of Fort Myers in a car given him by an old and grateful friend, Henry Ford, whose early experiments with a combustion engine Edison had encouraged. And he liked to sit and look at nature.
Good day for an angel's picnic. They could lunch on the smell of flowers and new-mown hay, drink the moisture of the air, and dance to the hum of the bees.
But even in Fort Myers, he couldn't sit still for very long. Close by his home, he built a small laboratory. His friends Ford and Firestone had presented him with a great challenge. Could he find a domestic source of natural rubber? The best source, he reasoned, would be something that grows in great abundance. What was more abundant than the flowers of the field around him? He started by testing every plant, every flower, every leaf, every growing thing he could lay his hands on. Thousands of them tested and carefully classified in his notebooks on his neat shelves. Finally, he settled on the goldenrod as the most practicable source of rubber. Why? Because it was so plentiful. He worked late into the night on the incredible notion of squeezing rubber out of goldenrod, though the famous catnaps were growing longer. He didn't give up until, out of the lowly goldenrod, he actually produced his last legacy to humanity. His desk at the West Orange Laboratory is, as he left it, crammed full of innumerable projects, improvements on the old inventions, plans for many, many new inventions, telephone, telegraph, dynamo. He had taken out the incredible number of 1,097 patents in his 84 years of life, and still he could envision with youthful fervor.
When I look around at the resources of the electrical field today, I feel I would be glad to begin again my work as an electrician and inventor. And we veterans can only urge upon our successors, the younger followers of Franklin and of Kelvin, to realize the measure of their opportunities and to rise to the height of their responsibilities in this day of electricity.